I almost never make a build centered around a rare item, but I found this ring on trade for 3 divines and immediately knew what to do with this gigantic mana regen rate and also its huge minus mana penalty. So Sap of Seasons is a tincture that gives you 1% elemental penetration with attacks per mana burn. This is usually counteracted for solo players using an Endearing Mana Flask and Tides of Time. You combine this with a Various on the Milton Faith Timeless Jewel to reduce the max mana pool for high stacks of mana burn. However, I don't like mana flasks. There's two problems. One, you gotta use a mana flask every like 7-8 seconds for endearing. That is hugely painful and annoying. The second thing is that it disables a flask slot effectively, so it's not very efficient for mage blood builds. This ring, however, enables another route, which is mana regeneration. Now, there's two main sources of base mana regen for this build. One is from Chevron's Revelation, which gives you a base 40, and the second is using a high level Clarity. Usually using Clarity for Avarius is very painful, since you have low flat mana from the Avarius Jewel converting mana to armor. However, I use a really cheap Clarity Alls that no one usually wants, which in this case is the same as opening up 250% of my entire mana pool for preservation. Now there are three main multipliers of that base mana regen on top of that. A lot of that comes from the ring. The shield that I also got has mana regen, which I slammed luckily. And finally, I get mana recovery rate, a more multiplier on top of all other rates of regen from a Watcher's Eye. The other main piece of this build comes from quality stacking. Now this is for two main skill gems, Reave and Energy Blade. Both of these fit into a 3-link shield with Enhanced 4, which also has crafted +2 support gems from the bench. Now Reave, this skill gets more stages per quality, which means more AoE. On my setup, that equals 8.1 meters radius on my attack. That's the same as a fully channeled Flame Blast with 800% increased area effect. Now a separate Vol Reave to get big stacks is in my shield. However, those maximum stacks can actually be maintained in a separate damaging Reave for my 6-link chest. Energy Blade, on the other hand, gets reduced energy shield penalty per quality. It's a very powerful gem for getting a massive amount of flat damage on your character. However, that penalty is quite annoying and people really opt for Ephemeral Edge in the past for more defensive setups. With a lot of quality stacking though, the downside is quite heavily mitigated. Otherwise, this is on a General's Cry Blade Flurry setup for a Trickster, something that I sort of brought back last patch on the Slayer League Starter, also using Sap of Seasons. However, last patch we had Doriani's prototype on our Mercenaries, this patch we don't. So Sap of Seasons is comparatively much stronger, and this build actually has a huge amount of damage, as you're able to see right away. Great Clear feels just absolutely amazing, and even though it's not like the most amazing end-to-end endgame build, not something I'd probably send into Voldo maps or anything like that, I think it's been really fun to play and probably my favorite build to play this league. Really simple, straightforward, and attacking. So I want to go over this character fairly methodically because there are a few things. Firstly, I am a Trickster. Forget about my Oshabi bloodline. Originally I was grabbing it with Rage, but then I realized I was using a sword and Blood Scent was fine. There aren't really other great bloodlines available in my opinion, but I mean, up to you. So it's pretty standard this patch. I'm just taking Escape Artist and Soul Drinker. They are nerfed, but they're still really good. Swift Killer is really great for enabling endurance charges off my chest, and also just having better charge generation on a kind of semi-limited charge generation build that only has it really well bossing, or when you're hitting rare. So this is very helpful for uptime. And then Polymath is still, okay, 20%. The rest of the tree is fairly right-sided for attack base, still Chaos Inoculation, playing a triple cluster setup. These are fairly cheap because a lot of people have different projects for how they're crafting 8p attack clusters using a shield with Veteran Defender. However, this shield is a bit more expensive using Blood Scent. This is for rage generation, but a third Veteran Defender is also okay. I put my Avarius here, and I also make sure to grab this node. The way that Avarius works is that it works on thresholds, so for every 10 devotion. So if you have 125 devotion or 100 devotion, you don't get anything for it. But like on each 10 threshold you will get something. In my case, I got base mana regen here. It's actually possible for me to actually drop my Clarity setup and play Ashes of the Stars if I really wanted to for more defenses and just like smoother gameplay as far as that General's Cry Blade Flurry cooldown goes, and also having bigger Reave AoE. However, right now in my current setup I can sustain up to like 300 and something mana stacks. What's it say here? I mean, I think it's about 320 mana burn stacks. A little bit more. There's a few things that aren't calculating POV, and also I have the little bit of mana recoup on my Watchers, so if I'm taking damage, that can actually go even higher. One thing to note, you do need to have some reserved or unreserved mana when you're playing Sap of Seasons. I think it has to do with server tick issues, but basically it'll show like your mana at 26 at the start, right? Or my mana. And as my mana burn rate goes up, this will just start hovering at 25, and then 24, and then 23, and 22. It's not that my mana regen isn't more than my mana burn stacks. I just think that like there's something there. It happened when I was playing the Infinite Life Regen Sap of Seasons build, and same thing. So yeah, can't reserve everything, even though I have insane mana cost and almost no cost of skills. This ring also comes with a minus 23, I forgot to mention that. It is just an insane ring that someone bricked for, I would imagine, a Mana Man build, but who knows. The skill gems next. In my helmet, I'm running Mark on Hit, Assassin's Mark, Punishment, and Blood and Sand. This is just for increased AoE. I never go into Blood mode, it's always in Sand stance. I'm running the setup for Qual stacking my shield. You can see this is my +2 shield. We can talk about how to craft that later. In my main setup, I'm running Reave, mostly with AoE links and also Fortify, because you do get fort off this, the hits are big, so it's basically a utility setup. Awaken Multi-Strike is insanely expensive, but it feels pretty good. I mean, I would use regular Multi-Strike over a better damage gem. Frostblink and Clarity are in my weapon. The third socket in my weapon is actually an Abyssal Jewel. Abyssal Jewels inside Energy Blades still stay active, so this gives me CB, I mean, just 3 great set, you can see it seems nuts. Shield charge, I actually don't use faster attacks here anymore. I could be dropping, let's say, you know, Blood and Sand for faster attacks, and then playing, or playing, like, I don't know, there's a different setup. I had a haste setup originally, but I decided not to. Fletch and Stone is a great defensive for this build, and then Desecrate. So Desecrate, if you don't already know, for GCBF builds, you just cast, you know, once, twice on bosses, and General's Cry doesn't, like, consume the corpses. It just pulls your, kind of, what are these things called? Mirage Warriors from those corpses. So as long as that Desecrate's already there, it just keeps pulling it out of there. You don't need to resummon. Or re-Desecrate out of there. And then a Discipline gives me a lot of flat. I mean, it's just good in general. Energy Blade, scale both offense, defense. Not the craziest, though. Finally, for the main single target, the Sin pair of Gloves, which is General's Cry, Auto Exertion, Volatility, and Blade Flurry. Pretty straightforward stuff. Gearing was really interesting on this character. It was fairly easy to craft most of it, but we can still go over it. I think it's kind of cool. The shield was the one part that was basically entirely brute force. I bought a synth base and I slammed Essences of Woe until I hit decent enough percent ES, and also avoid elemental ailments. I really wanted to hit that mod. And then I just double slammed Suffix and then bench crafted a support gem. You can also use Foulborns at that stage, but this is a brute force shield. If you don't use a synth shield, there are a bunch of different ways to go for this that make it much easier to do, but obviously with the synth, it's actually a +7 instead for my enhance, or it's an enhance 7 rather. Helmet, easy. This is treecraft. Get more defense, more attack, and then just use ES base. Should be fairly straightforward at this point on tree. Just defense, attack. There's only one attack mod on helmet, that's accuracy. The chest, I just bought this on trade. The reason I bought this on trade, I made a mistake actually. But basically what you want to do is, again, use tree. Probably want to disable as many suffix modifiers as possible, get increased defense, try to hit triple T1 defense mods. If you don't get good suffixes, either use T1 suppress. You can just use Eldritch Chaos and use Eldritch Crafting for the suffixes, which is what I did. The Warlock Gloves, this is probably the one I'll get most questions on if you guys are playing a build like this, which is quite strange. Use an essence of, I want to say Horror, for that base crit chance, 3.5%, until you hit faster attacks. And then you want to lock suffixes, assuming you have one open suffix, so suffixes can't be changed, and Reforge Crit. This will guarantee socketed attacks have 50% chance or X% chance to critical strike multi. There's 3 tiers for that, I think same as faster attacks. Once the suffixes are done, on this build, I actually went Reforged Fizz. The reason I went Reforged Fizz is to get any amount of Fizz damage to attacks. It's guaranteed. I happen to hit a tiny amount of flat ES on this, which is not bad. You could also Reforge Defense, and then I benchcraft. The reason I go Reforged Fizz is because Energy Blade doesn't have Fizz damage on it, I think. So if I take this pair of gloves off, yeah, I don't have physical damage anymore. But that physical damage enables this bleed cluster, which, I mean, I think is pretty good. If you guarantee good defense mod, that's great and everything. But otherwise, this gives you a ton of crit chance. You can see, like, on my Reave setup, let's say. This cluster is something like, what, 5.5% more damage per node, which is really, really powerful. And it was just, like, easy, because it's guaranteed, and I don't care about the tier. Boots, avoid ailments. This is Essence of Woe until you hit flat ES. Lock prefixes. Veiled Orb until you hit a prefix. Again, you might need to brute force that a few steps. It's 50-50 prefix suffix in the Veiled Orb. You can actually use Veiled Chaos instead of Veiled Exalt as well. And then suffixes after can be done with Eldritch Currency. Yeah, don't need the Void Chill. Alls, this is 1 divine. No one wants clarity alls. And then Revelation, bleeding cannot be inflicted. This is like 15, pretty expensive. Obviously, this is a 3D, and then Mage Blood. Pretty standard Mage Blood melding setup. There's 4 sources of max res. Max res grabbed here, max res grabbed here. Both these are quite strong. One is damage, the other one is lucky damage, so super good. And then 2 max res jewels. I'll talk about the one I self-crafted. So this is starting with Fractured Crit Multi and then Reforged Defense till you hit any maximum resistance. You can then harvest swap that maximum resistance over and over again to both re-roll the value and also change the resistance, whether it's max fire, max cold, or max lightning, into max lightning. Sap seasons here. The other large clusters I've already talked about. If you want to craft them yourself, it's usually Reforge. Ooh, I want to say it's Reforge Attack. I think that's what we were doing during Gauntlet. Try to hit Feed the Fury and Veteran Defender. I think most of the 3 suffixes work. For the uniques, I run melding and yeah, I run a base melding setup. The Forbidden Jewels, I'm playing Born in the Shadows. I thought these would be super expensive. They were cheap too, because Valdos farmers used them onto their Tricksters, but it ended up being like, I don't know, 3D for the pair or something, which is pretty interesting to me. I think it's still pretty strong to play Shadow, especially with that. My Watcher's Eye happens to be a triple clarity Watcher's Eye. The only mod that actually matters is non-channeling skills have minus mana cost. The other ones are nice, but not that important. My Militant Faith, I run this one for resistance. Why? Well, firstly, my res isn't actually capped or overcapped very much for the other ones. But I also like clicking red side altars, and this means I can basically click any of the Searing Exarch altars as long as I drop Ghost Dance when I'm doing that kind of farm. Light of Meaning ES, this is, you know, pretty boring and normal, but quite good. And then finally, the last thing to mention is Impossible Escape. My Impossible Escape is at Elemental Equilibrium, and on a cursory look, it looks like not impressive. The reason why this is important is because of how Tincture Effects works with Sap of Seasons. So it's not that like you get to scale that 200%. That maximum 200% is always capped. But you gotta look at that melee weapon damage penetrates 1% line as the most important line. It's 1%. And for this particular thing, there's no rounding from what I understand or what I've been told. In other words, to get any benefit, you need over 100% increased Tincture Effect. At 99, doesn't do anything, I think. So this EE Jewel actually saves me a ton of slots, getting that Tincture Effect to 100, and I'll show the source for that in a bit. Mothered Hunter is not bad at all, great node for accuracy, 1 point phasing because I didn't want to play Quartz Flask, and Gladiator's Perseverance is actually just really good in general. But it's mostly just for these 2 things, really powerful. I wish it was a bit bigger to get Crystal Skin because it would have been fantastic. Now, Tincture Effect, let's talk about that. Look at the search menu. It says 71%, right? But you see over here it says 111. The sources of Tincture Effect that I have are 1 from the Hidden Anoint, Legacy of the Wilds, when you're above 10 mana burn. And 2 is just the rest of it. So I got 10%, 10% here. I got 8%, 8%, 10%, or I got 8, 10, 15, not 30. I would also take this maybe, but I couldn't think about which flasks I want to have. But 10% increased flask spec is pretty good. And then finally I take these 2 nodes. I don't need all of them. I can drop 1 10%, but there's no really like easy way to do this because I don't like frequently press the life loss. I should be dropping this though, I think though. Just in case I'm not hitting, but this is like 101. I'm just like scared things are like, I'm just a little paranoid. Yeah, I never know how things work, but definitely it works at 100 because my damage from 100 to 200 does not change at all. So yeah, that's the build. It's been super fun to play. There's some like tattoos for suppression and whatnot, but pretty standard ES setup in some ways, but also like I think the changes of this versus like say based on Energy Blade setup are really cool, and you end up with a much lower investment, much higher damage setup that also has just like the most amazing clear in the world. I mean, like look at this, dude. It's huge. Like it's massive, and it's felt just amazing to play. We'll see what I want to do for the rest of the league, but you know, I hope you guys can glean some information from this build and like learn something new.